and welcome again to the Executive Room podcast, where we delve deep into the minds of remarkable executives who have shaped the business world with their ideas and actions. I'm your host, Kimberly Afonso, CEO and founder of the KA Consulting Group, where we are experts at helping CEOs increase their visibility to gain more influence. And today, it's an honor to have James Wood join us. James Wood is the co-founder and CEO of Bowdark Consulting, where he helps organizations harness technology to streamline operations, fill knowledge gaps, and free teams to focus on high-impact work. Drawing on over 25 years of experience in enterprise software, including roles at SAP America and IBM, James builds transformative solutions that enable data-driven decision-making and scalable growth. As an SAP Mentor alumnus and best-selling author of numerous enterprise software titles, he leads Bowdark's mission to turn bold ideas into practical, high-value reality. And we see that on your screen, James, for those who are watching on video. So I think let's start there. It's great to have you, James. You've been involved in enterprise software for decades. Walk us through a little bit of the evolution of your career to when you co-founded Bowdark in 2006. Why did you decide to start your own company, and how has it led you to where you are today?
Yeah, well, first, thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation here today. My background. So, I was rather fortunate coming out of college. Had computer science background. Stumbled into the enterprise software space with an opportunity with PricewaterhouseCoopers. This was about 5 minutes before Enron happened, and we got spun off to IBM, and so a little bit of a journey there. But it was a great opportunity to get into the SAP space and more broadly enterprise software, and seeing how a lot of very large global companies were implementing these ERP and CRM packages, and seeing a lot of transformational results. But I guess to your question about why we ended up founding Bowdark, for us a lot of it was the large system integrators. The focus is primarily on delivering these massive multi-year rollouts. And for us, we really wanted to get more intimate with customers to be able to home in on specific areas of the business, specific pain points and modules where when you're doing a large scale ERP rollout, for example, you don't necessarily get that opportunity to get very hands-on with a lot of that. And so our approach was to be a little bit more side by side, working with business teams, kind of rolling up our sleeves and trying to delve deeper and solve more holistic problems that exist within end-to-end process design and things like that.
And in your experience working with global clients and enterprise systems, what are some of the hidden risks or legacy constraints that companies often underestimate when trying to modernize processes?
I think for us, one of the things that we find is it's fascinating, depending on who you talk to within these organizations, as to how much process coverage they have. A lot of times, if it's an Oracle shop or an SAP shop, whatever their first class ERP is, they'll talk about process coverage in terms of the modules they have and what they've implemented. But when you talk to a lot of the folks on the ground, it's a pretty different story. At the end of the day, they may well be recording transactions in these systems, but a surprising amount of the work actually happens outside of the system, and it can be in the form of phone calls, emails, text messages, chat messages, Excel, Access, all this kind of shadow IT-esque stuff that's kind of lurking on the periphery. And I think it speaks to sort of a lack of understanding within a lot of these ERP packages as far as what is the natural flow of work. A lot of times there's this expectation that, we've given you all these transactions, we have all these screens, and it's a lot of forms over data, but all the functionality you need to do your job is packaged up into this, nice tidy ERP solution. When the reality is, especially these days, you have more and more of a mobile workforce. You have people working, as frontline workers, on the shop floor and manufacturing, and the idea of bringing the work into the hands of the right people at the right time. That's kind of a missing element, and I think that's a lot of times what we see in terms of that. Is the process fully optimized? Maybe from the perspective of one individual business system, yes, but more broadly, there's a lot of work that's going on outside of it that's not so optimized.
And I really love how you said you build with your clients. You work with a lot of major clients in major enterprises and sectors such as energy, defense, manufacturing. You work with large, complex organizations. What are some of the unique challenges you encounter, and why do you believe so strongly in building solutions with clients?
Yeah, I think it's such a long time. The adage is that it's always it's cheaper to buy than it is to build, and I think to a large extent that still rings true. But I think for especially nowadays with the advent of low code technology and AI and some other innovations, the cloud, there are places where it makes sense to have, here's our special sauce. This is what sets us apart from the competition. And, it does make sense to maybe figure out, how can we optimize further? How can we start to create some competitive advantages within our industry sector? I think that's one thing we've seen a lot, with the proliferation of SaaS applications is in some ways it's taking steps back to take steps forward. We're moving to the cloud, and you're seeing some modernization happening with the core modules within these ERP systems. But a lot of those industry solutions and things, those are kind of left by the wayside, and it's somewhere in a roadmap, but it might be 5 or 10 years away. And in the meantime, with everything that's going on within the business, there's just not that time to really be able to limp along the way that maybe a company would have 20 years ago, let's say. And so I think just recognizing that and picking your battles. I mean, it certainly doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel with, a general ledger or certain parts of accounting, but I mean, other parts of the business I think are very ripe for maybe where there's a little more opportunity to innovate around the edges.
And I love that you also mentioned, low code, no code platforms. And, you mentioned it yourself. Tech landscape is constantly evolving. Companies are evolving. Cloud is evolving. AI. All of this makes companies have a lot to consider now that's a lot different, like you said, than they did 20 years ago. So, what trends are you most excited about in the next 3 to 5 years? And how are you positioning your company to ride or even lead some of these trends?
Well, I think there's so many different potential answers to that, but I think as much as AI is overhyped, I also think there's some real truth to the way that it is fundamentally shifting. Just so in our space, software engineering. I mean, it's changes the development economics completely. Now our development team, for example, we have pretty major use in GitHub Copilot and some of these types of tools where it's more paired programming. I would say it's not as if the AI is just going off and writing lots and lots of code on its own. But I mean, there's certainly more of an opportunity for our team to be able to more or less delegate tasks, routine tasks, those tedious tasks that really add up into development hours. And so, we talk about just changing up the development economics. It does make that buy versus build conversation change a little bit. It does open up the opportunity to maybe have more tailor-made solutions, even things like SaaS. Do we maybe spend a little bit more upfront to build a solution for us and not have to pay, the annual subscriptions or monthly subscriptions? I mean, there's so many different, things that I think companies are having an opportunity to rethink, and AI is really kind of at the forefront of unlocking new potential that just hasn't been there historically. I mean, there's just physics. There's only so many hours in the day, and it's definitely changed in that regard.
And I'd love to hear now about some of your best-selling enterprise software books. You have, Getting Started with SAP HANA Cloud Platform. And tell us about your books. What motivated you to start writing? How do you approach making highly technical topics accessible and practical? And how did you get started? And how long are these books relevant for? Because I'd love to hear your opinion on that as well, which, I've heard different things from different authors related to anything related to SaaS or enterprise software. So share with us.
Yeah, so lots to unpack there. I mean, you mentioned that the shelf life. I mean, I definitely think that has been something that we've seen change quite a bit. I mean, there are certain topics that are somewhat timeless, but the book that you mentioned was a good example of one. In fact, when we put that book together, we would complete chapters only to discover that because it's on a monthly cadence and new release of functionality, wholesale changes had to be made to the chapters because it's not relevant anymore. That functionality no longer exists, or it's changed in fundamental ways. And so I do think it has made that much more difficult, and I think you're seeing a shift in that industry towards smaller ebooks and more bite-sized um, topics that hopefully have a slightly longer shelf life at the end of the day. But yeah, it's to me it's a little bit sad. Personally, I learned very well from books. More of a, I guess, a visual learner, and so even though you could tell me there's all these web resources and you go read, there's just something very nice about having a book that just kind of has it all put together for you, and hopefully the author has done a good job of organizing the content and making it accessible and so forth. And to your earlier question, I mean, I think that was my goal in setting out, for each of these titles is to try to come up with something that builds and it's easy to digest, and hopefully at the end of the day the reader is able to take something away from that, that having learned at least from a broad perspective what the particular technology is. It's so hard these days to go down into the depths of every possible nook and cranny with these types of things, but it's a unique challenge. I mean, my start with this, I was actually teaching some introductory computer science courses at a local university, and you think you know things until you get in front of an audience and realize that they don't have the background that you have. That you have to assume that they know almost nothing about this topic. They're seeing it for the first time, and I think that has helped to kind of frame up the way that we approach writing to some extent, just to have that mindset of let's make sure that we cover every little thing and we put it into a logical order that doesn't have people constantly guessing, and that kind of, I guess, fear that starts to mount as you're reading, like I don't understand what all this is about, and kind of mounts. That gentle introduction I think is really key.
Oh, definitely. And did you find it easy to write your books? How was the process for you?
Definitely not. It's a labor of love. I think that there are times. I mean, I'm sure every writer is different, but you think you have an idea and you sit down and you might get half a page in the course of 4 hours, and then other times it flows a little bit more smoothly. But it is it's a difficult exercise because you just question everything, as far as what and does this make sense, and is it relatable, and all those types of things. So it's easy to get in your own head.
Oh, I've seen it many times before, so I always love hearing, different perspectives on that. What advice would you give to other, it could either be tech or SaaS entrepreneurs looking to write a book?
Um, I think, to me, as long as you're writing about something that you're passionate about, I mean, it is certainly a difficult exercise, but it's a rewarding exercise. And I think, as far as advice, I mean, just be open to learning yourself. I think sometimes I've talked to other authors that kind of had a vision of just, I'm going to download some information from my brain and get it on the page and then walk away. And the reality is, as much as as knowledgeable as you may be on a particular topic, when you go through this exercise, you're going to learn an awful lot about yourself and the topic. And so, that can be very rewarding, and just embracing the process and going through that is something I would definitely encourage, any sort of would-be writer to, just throw in. I mean, there's nothing better than just diving in with both feet, and, it's kind of a sink or swim, I suppose.
Definitely. Definitely great advice. I think the passion behind the topic is always number one, and that always shows through. So, as you know, James, this podcast is always about vocal leadership as well. And, you've written books, you appear regularly on podcasts, webinars, all different things related to business led IT strategy, Microsoft, SAP integration, and more. What impact has your visibility had on your company's growth? And what advice would you share with CEOs who are still hesitant to amplify their voice but are curious about potentially getting out there more?
Yeah, I'd like to think it's made us more relatable. I think, going through this journey, some of the different, medium, we've seen. I mean, I get odd emails at times. Just people that are curious that, for whatever reason, I pique their interest, and it sparks further conversation. And sometimes you'll almost see kind of this hesitancy of, I have this question, but I didn't want to bother someone. I didn't want to approach, or maybe they're not real confident in their question. And so, yeah, I think maybe just breeding a little bit of familiarity, and kind of breaking the ice a little bit to be able to have more meaningful conversations. And, sometimes it may lead to an opportunity, and sometimes it's just nice to make a connection, with someone that may be struggling with a particular topic. And so, hopefully just kind of making, I mean, all these corporations, I mean, we all have our little LinkedIn company pages and logos and things, and it's easy to become, just kind of another, company in a sea of, there's plenty of choice out there when it relates to this sort of thing. And so, just giving a little bit more of a personal touch, I think is the piece that, has been the most rewarding for us.
That's a great, great example. And I think I agree. It's something I've seen from the outside is one of the best, you know, things that come from being more visible is you do get more of that personal touch. And outside of your work, what hobbies or creative pursuits energize you the most?
Well, I have 4 kids, so they keep me pretty busy, and I don't know. Sometimes not, maybe not energized, but they require copious amounts of energy. I also like to cook, which is, in some ways, I guess, sort of related to my love of programming, just kind of, building recipes and experimentation. So, I've always enjoyed kind of getting in the kitchen and tinkering with things. Sometimes they turn out well, not sometimes not so much. But it's just the joy in the journey, I suppose.
And what's something on the horizon that you're most excited about these days?
Um, yeah, I think a lot of it for me comes down to convergence. We can talk about any number of technologies, but I think just the convergence of a lot of these technologies, and what it unlocks in terms of democratization. Um, Being a small business owner myself, I mean, I have a passion for small business. And when we had this conversation 20, 25 years ago, a lot of times when people would ask me, what can I do for my business? And the answer was, well, there's not a lot of software that's probably within your price range and your access to be able to do the things that you're wanting to do. But now, you pick an industry, pick a lane. I mean, there's so much opportunity now to take a lot of these different technologies, and if you're naturally curious and creative, um, there's ways to take all this technology and really bring it to bear on solving some pretty complex problems. And so I think that's something that's just very exciting to see play out. I mean, you're seeing companies have success that they just being able to compete on a scale that they haven't been before, and that's very rewarding to see.
Do you have any favorite technologies you'd share for small business owners?
Um, yeah, I mean, I would say for small business owners, a lot of times where we start is simple tools like a Power BI, and data. There's so many organizations that it's funny when you talk to them, they're almost embarrassed. We're on QuickBooks. It's almost kind of. But the thing that's oftentimes missing is you have some data. Maybe you could be on a more modern system here and there, but you're still making decisions based on gut feel and not data. And so, just being able to take a simple tool like a Power BI and bring all your data together and start to analyze it, we see that make just significant impact on organizations because it kind of opens their eyes to things that that saying what gets measured gets managed. So the more visibility they have into KPIs and things like that, I think it's even though it may be low hanging fruit to some, it really does seem to make a huge impact.
Very, very useful and something I wouldn't have thought about myself, especially related to what you said about what, gets measured. That's how you want to make your decision. So, to wrap up, James, where would you recommend a small or mid-sized business to start to, thinking about your work, thinking about some of the tools you've recommended, where would you recommend small to mid-sized businesses to start if they wanted to really invest into, yeah, taking their business into the next generation of where we're going in 2025, 2026, and beyond?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just figuring out what it is you want out of your business landscape. A lot of times there's this tendency to whatever ERP package we buy into or whatever CRM package, it has these best run processes, and that's how we need to align our organization. And I think now it's more of a question of how do you want to run your business? How if you could wave a magic wand over a given department and define what's the most optimal way for this process to run, to really be able to think of it in those terms, because I would submit that the technology is there. It's more of a just kind of, I guess, recalibrating mindsets at times, because I think people come from different organizations, different backgrounds, and they sort of get conditioned to this is just how software is. There's no better opportunity. It's just we're going to have to make do with what we have, and I don't think that's really the case so much anymore. But it does require a very different mindset, and so just be able, going through that inventory and kind of doing the process analysis, and that's maybe not super fun for a lot of organizations, but really thinking through that carefully, I think is something that we see a tremendous value in, because now you're much better prepared to determine, not only making software purchasing selections, but also determining just how is it that we want to proceed here, because you have more options. You have of course the agentic AI wave that you're hearing about everywhere and things like that. It's re or allowing us to rethink the way that we do just about everything throughout the course of a business day.
Very well said. Well, thank you for joining us today, James. And until next time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.